I'm president of Americans for Prosperity. Thank you for joining us for another of our Facebook Live sessions with key leaders in Washington, D.C. You know, when we look at Washington, we see this frankly terrible policy agenda coming from Speaker Pelosi, from Chuck Schumer, and sadly from the new president as well. I can tell you at Americans for Prosperity, we're out there fighting hard in these congressional districts and states to try to stop some of the very worst of this legislation, this election bill, this PRO Act that will harm right to work, all the spending, and now a brand new spending and this time tax proposal that's coming out of Speaker Pelosi's team in the House. We're blessed to have a good leader from the great state of Texas. Mac Morris, go ahead and take away the introductions. And Mac, thanks for what you do in Texas with Americans for Prosperity.
Thanks so much, Tim. Grateful for being here today and having Congressman Roger Williams, who's a great voice for Texas. He serves on the Financial Services Committee and small business as well. He's a great businessman, runs small businesses. He knows what it's like with taxes and economics. He's had a history of doing events with us here in Texas. He's also a pretty good baseball player back at TCU and with the Braves. So we love that all-American attitude, but he really wants to dig in with us today on infrastructure and why Texas and across the country, we need to stop this spending bill and why we need to be smart about taking care of our infrastructure. And we're doing this across the state, talking with congressmen. We're holding congressmen accountable here in Texas too. Think Colin Allred and Lizzie Fletcher, but we got a champion in Roger Williams. His district spans all the way from Tarrant County all the way down to Travis County. So he's got lots of rural areas and lots of roads. So he knows something about infrastructure, and grateful to have you today, Congressman. I'm going to turn it over to you for some opening remarks, sir.
Well, thank you. We appreciate what Americans Prosperity does for us. You all create a wonderful stage for conservative values. You're talking about infrastructure. You know, I'll remind your listeners, when I'm not in Congress, I've been in the car business for 51 years, car dealerships. So I would naturally, infrastructure and moving product around is important to me. But this infrastructure bill that the liberals are putting on us right now is not really an infrastructure bill. I mean, you know, all of a sudden, did we ever think, Tim and Mac, we'd have to define what should be in an infrastructure bill? Look, we know it's roads, we know it's bridges, we know it's ports. Something new is broadband, which definitely has to be in what we talk about. But it's not anything called environmental justice. I don't know what that means. It has nothing to do with the Supreme Court, for example. It has nothing to do with these things they're making up as we go along. So, you know, infrastructure, we need to define infrastructure. It should be bipartisan, and I'm anxious to get going and begin to build on what our needs are. The problem is that this administration wants to tax everybody, and you can't tax enough to what we need. We need the private sector involved. They don't have the private sector involved. The more private sector involvement, the less the taxpayers are on the hook. We need to think out of the box a little bit, much like we've done in Texas in the past. It works. So it's a money grab. I'm concerned about that. Taxes can't pay for it, but we can get some seed capital from the government. Put the private sector involved. We can get this stuff done faster, cheaper, and better than if we're just relying on the federal government to do it and tax the taxpayers to nothing.
Well, I think that's really important you bring that up, Congressman. You know, taxes, the spending is $4 trillion.
Yeah, I can tell you out on the road with Americans for.
I think we're running a couple glitches with Tim. He's out on the road today. He's been traveling the country.
Sorry, Mac. I apologize. Go ahead.
No, you're good, Tim. Tim's out there, so he knows what infrastructure is when he's on the roads and having internet too. But we're doing this campaign right now, stopping the spending spree. Tim, do you want to tee that a little bit more off for folks across the country to understand what we're doing at the grassroots level?
Absolutely, Mac. I'm out on the road. We've targeted about 35 districts with swing members of Congress or in swing districts where these Democrats, frankly, they ought to not be voting for this extreme legislation that's coming out of Washington, including this new tax and spend bill. So we're doing rallies and events. I was in Philadelphia, or excuse me, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Des Moines, Iowa, and Dallas, Texas, and Congressman Allred's district. We're wanting to make sure that we turn the temperature up so folks in these districts understand what their members of Congress are doing with all this taxing and spending. So it's a big effort we're undertaking. And Congressman, we've been seeing these inflation numbers spiking over the last 2 or 3 months. Give us a sense of how all this spending can play into that, right? It can actually jack up those inflation numbers, and that's hurting folks on fixed incomes.
Well, there's no question. We're seeing inflation now. We know that just printing money and this the debt that we have is creating inflation. We see it everywhere, right? We see it in the grocery store. We see it at the gas pump. We see it in my business. And we've got to get it under control. And this administration doesn't want to talk about it. It's a byproduct of what they're doing, and that's one issue. It's going to hit home. And we've gone a long time without inflation, and people have been able to get quality goods for a quality price, as what it should be. But we've got to cut out this deficit spending, and we go $30 trillion right now. And when you start tacking on interest, we know that's going to be 70-80% of our GDP will be in interest. I mean, this is a scary time right now, and that's why I think we need to cut taxes instead of raise taxes. We need to cut taxes, create more taxpayers, let small business get return on investment, start a business, put people to work, which we're paying people not to work right now. This is all a byproduct of what's happening. And this administration doesn't seem to have a clue or even care about it. But we're still on the Trump economy, which is a good thing. But when we start hearing tax increase, we start seeing inflation, we start seeing high prices at the pump, it concerns people, it slows things down. So we do no good to pay people to sit on the couch. We do really good to pay people to take a risk and get reward in America.
Agreed there, Congressman. Thinking about taxes, the spending, they're looking at increasing taxes on businesses. A lot of people think corporations, wealthy, but you have to think about small businesses here in the state of Texas. You're a small business owner. You think about the family farms and the ranches. They're talking about increasing the death tax. How is this going to really affect people back in the district?
Well, it's a disaster. Look at Main Street America, as you guys know, they generate 75% of the employees, 70% of businesses are small business. They employ 500 people or less. Main Street America, you're talking about 9 and 10 employees at a time. And they're being devastated already by this conversation. Look, you can't raise taxes to create income. You cut taxes to create more taxpayers, more cash flow. The problem up here is not income, as you know, it's spending, okay? So Main Street is hurting right now, and we can't find anybody to work. The great thing about it is under President Trump and the tax increases or the tax cuts we made back in 2016 is we ended up having more jobs than people. Do y'all remember that? More jobs than people. I never thought that could happen mathematically. I never thought of it, Well, now we have more jobs than people because it's just the opposite. It's rolled over from where people were working because you could take risk, get reward, and grow your company. Now you can't grow your company. You don't want to take any risk because there's no reward now. So now we got people sitting on the couch, and all of a sudden we got more jobs than people in the Biden administration, but it's backwards. And we've got to fix that and cut out paying this extra unemployment and get people back to work again. Because the greatest asset we have is the American worker, but we got to put them to work.
Well, thank you, Congressman. We're talking too, about roads and everything else across Texas. We got a big state. You have a big district. I've been hearing they want to institute some new Green Deal policies as well. I think I just lost Tim there, but we'll continue with that. New Green Deal policies. As you know, it's hot. It's hot in Texas. We're getting up to over 100 degrees every day. We're looking at electric costs going up. If they pass these new Green Deal policies in the bill, how is that going to affect people? It really is going to hurt the least among us.
It's going to hurt everybody. I mean, from the big to the little. It's going to, as you said earlier, I'm a rancher also. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt the way people do their business on their farms. It's going to drive costs up. The Green Deal picks winners and losers. And in Texas, as you know, fossil fuel, it's kind of a big deal, right, where we're from. And we don't need to be trying to force other other opportunities, whether it be wind or other things down that people don't want. So the Green Deal should be something that competes with everything else, that does not get subsidized and forced down people's throat. One of the things, of course, we being in the business are the EV vehicles. That's fine if consumers want that. But right now in Texas, consumers are not wanting that. I mean, they still want to pull a horse trailer, jet ski, and their motorhome. EV vehicles won't do that. It's going to drive up the cost of their electrical bills. And also, you talk to the government's talking about putting all these energy stations in for the EV vehicles. That's a waste of money. They don't need to do that. The manufacturer will do that if enough consumers want that product. But they're not thinking like that. They're just thinking big government will own you, and you do what we tell you to do. And that's not going to work, certainly in Texas.
Well, we certainly need innovation across the country. We don't need the top-down approaches that we're seeing from Washington, D.C., as Texas has led pretty well on a lot of these things. We have a diverse energy portfolio, and folks should be able, consumers, decide what they want at the end of the day. Some great innovations, though, in EV, but this bill on infrastructure, we're talking about 5% to the physical. Talk about the rest of this wasteful spending. I've seen things about human infrastructure. I didn't know that was a new thing that we're saying these days, or childcare. How does that figure in? Because everybody wants to help and take care of things, but it doesn't seem like that's really the role of government to spend so much money like this.
Well, it's not. And they're spending money they don't have, and they're going to tax you and me and small business in Main Street to pay for it. And you can't tax that much enough to do that. That's what I've said. And we have to get back to what's infrastructure. And you brought it up so well. We want childcare, but that's not infrastructure. And all these and the life issues are not infrastructure. And we're having to argue over that as opposed to getting a bill that should be bipartisan and get going and find out how we're going to pay for it. And look, we have to have competition. The government does not need to name winners and losers. And you take the EV vehicles, for example. I think you get a $7,500 credit for buying one. And some dealers are getting $7,500 from the manufacturer to sell one. It's a loser. And so let the consumer say, this is what I want, and then build it. Don't build it and force it down the consumer. That's not free market. That's not competition. That's not capitalism. It works when you let the individual decide what they want and build what individuals, not vice versa.
Well, thank you, Congressman. For anybody joining this conversation right now, we're having a conversation about infrastructure, the wasteful spending. I want to direct everybody right now to stopthespendingspree.com, where you can fill out a pre-formatted email to your congressman and your 2 senators to tell them no. We got to hold some folks accountable, but I'll tell you what, members of Congress need to hear from constituents across the country. And people like Roger Williams, who are lending his voice today, he needs to hear from you as well, that you support his efforts to say, stop this wasteful spending. That's what we are as a grassroots organization. So, Congressman, I want to turn it back over to you. When you think about taxes, spending, everything else, how is this really going to play out? We're going to increase the debt. We've already spent $6 trillion in COVID relief over the last year. That's more than World War I and World War II combined in terms of spending. How is that going to figure into it? We talked about inflation. It seems like we're going to have to push that off onto future generations.
Well, we are. And, if interest rates go up, we're raising interest on ourselves. And interest rates have been down so low. I come from a world, I remember 21% interest. And now you're talking about 2 and 3% interest. But the debt's so high that you can't afford to raise the interest rates. And what's going to happen is, like I say, it'll take up the large part of our GDP. Here's the bottom line. The only way you increase taxpayers, you create income, you create jobs, you create fair markets, et cetera, is you have to cut taxes. And we need to cut taxes even more. And the reason we have the debt is because we have crazy spending nobody wants to mess with. And both sides are guilty of that. We've got to address the debt. It's not the cash flow, but you can't tax your way out of a problem. You can cash flow your way out of a problem. And so that's what I'm fighting for every day, is because if we raise taxes, we're going to slow this economy down to where it barely moves, and the burden of Main Street will be unbelievable. And when you have burdens like that, you have regulations that choke Main Street even more. So, the other side says, you can't cut taxes. You have to be able to cut more taxes. Let businesses start, let people take risks, get reward. It's called America. It's called the American dream. But what Biden's got going right now is the American scheme. And he's slowing things down drastically. And the problem I have too, I'm concerned with the fact that the president and the vice president, not that they're a different party from I am, but they have no experience. I mean, Joe Biden has never run a business. As far as I know, he's never headed up a law firm. He's never signed the front of a check, and he's been a back check signer. He hadn't dealt with employees, and Vice President Harris has never been out in the open market. She never started a business. She never met a payroll. She never had to deal with employees. Never drew on a line of credit. That's my biggest concern for the leadership is we have no business people right now doing anything. So when we talk about the things we're talking about, they don't get it or they don't want to get it.
So you think about the grassroots, how can they communicate effectively with their elected officials so they have that information that elected officials got to make decisions? How can folks help with that?
Well, we all need to hear from our constituents, and it's not a time for conservatives that believe in the things we're talking about to stand down right now. A lot of them are tired, but we can't be tired. This literally is the most important election of our lifetime that's coming up. We always say that, don't we? But this really is. We're so close to 5 seats away from getting the House of Representatives and controlling the House and stopping all this bad legislation. So constituents need to tell their elected officials, look, I want less government. I want lower taxes. I want opportunities. I want to be able to get education back. I want my kids to go to school. We need to hear all of that because that brings America back. If we don't, the other side can win. But this is really important, this next election. I would plead to all your listeners that really look at this off-year election as the most important one. We get the House, we stop a lot of things. Then we'll go get possibly the Senate and win the White House back, get America back on a course we can live with and has a future.
Well, you talk about policy, you spoke about elections, but policy, do you think it's you can win over folks on both sides? This should be a bipartisan issue that you shouldn't spend so much. Do you hear from your colleagues that they want to do the right thing and stop spending as well?
Yeah, and people don't understand that why does the government can have a budget and they don't have to balance the books, right? Every small business does, every family does, every state does. It's like the Biden budget was, what was it, $6 trillion and never balances. Doesn't even give it a chance to balance. I mean, that is, as they say, fuzzy math as it gets. But people don't understand that why do I have to watch my bank account when the federal government doesn't? And we send a real bad example. There's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle. They're not worried about the debt. They're not worried about debt ceiling. They don't want to talk about it. And look, we can't cash flow out of it. We have to get serious and begin to cut expenses. I'm one of those that says, let's sit down and cut expenses like any other business does. We can pass a lot to the states and let the states, be those laboratory states that people decide where they want to live, where they don't want to live. There's a lot of creative things we can do that we could talk about forever, like 900,000 government-owned buildings where half of them are vacant or half used, and all that kind of stuff we could talk about. But we get so hung up on politics and anger up here that the important stuff gets away from us.
Well, the important stuff matters. As we close out today, what would be your message for people back in the district? As I'm an optimistic guy, I think we can do the right thing. And I think a lot of members of Congress would believe that they can do the right thing. It's just making sure that we live within our means. What would you tell people in the district and across the country today?
Well, I would tell everybody that you're important. Your vote does count. We need to hear your voice. Get engaged politically, not so much if you don't want to be involved at the national level, the local level. That's where we're beginning to lose some of our communities. But your voice is your vote. And I have people say, well, my vote doesn't count. Well, your vote does count. Look how close the elections are. But I would plead to the people in our country, get engaged, make sure your elected officials understand where you stand, hold them responsible for what they say they're going to do. Make sure you vote. Make sure you take your kids, your grandkids to vote. This is the greatest system in the world. It does need a little tweaking. We learned that from November of last year. But this is still the best system, and we have to participate. If we don't, the bad people will be in this business, and the good people will be on the sidelines, and those will be the ones being hurt. But I believe there's more people in America that think like we do. They think in conservative terms. They think in less government. They want less regulations. They want their states to be important to them. They want sovereignty. They want strong borders. And we have to fight every day for that. And we have to, if we have everybody standing behind those issues, we're going to win every single time. And America will continue to be the greatest nation in the world.
Well, thank you, Congressman. Folks, we've been talking with Congressman Roger Williams today. I can tell you, as a grassroots organization with Americans for Prosperity, we're getting voices across the state of Texas and across this country to really contact elected officials in Congress and the president. We've sent over 750,000 letters already to our elected officials. We want folks to be involved. The first step that you can do today is stopthespendingspree.com or get in touch with us in the comments and reach out to us at AFP. Congressman Roger Williams, we greatly appreciate your time. We appreciate you leading here in Texas. We want more of those voices from Texas because we think we can do the right thing and give everybody a shot at opportunities here in this country. So thank you again, sir, and thanks to everyone who tuned in today.
Thank you.